Imagine you're standing in line at your local coffee shop, but when you reach for your wallet, the barista shakes their head and points outside to the parking lot. "Your payment is over there," they say, gesturing toward what looks like a massive stone wheel, taller than a basketball hoop and wider than your car. "That'll cover your latte and about 10,000 more." You'd think someone was playing an elaborate prank on you. But on a tiny cluster of islands in the Pacific Ocean, this scene wouldn't raise an eyebrow. Welcome to Yap, where the most valuable currency in history never fit in anyone's pocket, and where the world's most successful banking system operated without a single building, computer, or written record. This isn't ancient history we're talking about. Well, not entirely. These massive stone discs, some weighing as much as small trucks, continue to serve as legitimate currency for the most important transactions in Yapi society. But here's what makes this story truly extraordinary. Some of the most valuable coins in their economy have been sitting at the bottom of the ocean for centuries, yet they're still being traded, inherited, and counted as family wealth today. How did a remote island develop a monetary system that would make modern economists question everything they thought they knew about money? How do you pay for a wedding with a 4-ton stone disc? And who were the remarkable individuals who managed to track every transaction across an entire archipelago using nothing but human memory? The answers reveal not just one of history's most ingenious financial systems, but a profound truth about the very nature of value, trust, and community that resonates powerfully in our digital age. If you love uncovering these hidden stories of human creativity, you'll feel right at home here. Stick around as we explore the mysterious world of stone money, where trust mattered more than transportation, where reputation was more valuable than gold, and where a single navigator's dream changed the course of an entire civilization. Our journey begins not in boardrooms or banks, but with a vision that came to a man named Anagumang over 500 years ago. Picture the scene. A small volcanic island in the vast Pacific surrounded by crystal-clear lagoons and coral reefs that stretch to the horizon. This is Yap, part of what we now call Micronesia, home to a few thousand people who have mastered the art of reading the ocean like others read books. The Yapis were accomplished, navigators who could sail hundreds of miles across open water using only the stars, the patterns of waves against their canoe hulls, and the behavior of seabirds. They were skilled farmers who coaxed taro and breadfruit from volcanic soil, and expert fishermen who knew every reef and current around their islands. But despite all their knowledge and skills, they faced a problem that seemed impossible to solve. Their islands, formed by ancient volcanic activity, were rich in basalt and coral, but completely lacking in one type of stone that held deep spiritual significance in their culture: limestone. To the Yapis, limestone wasn't just another rock, it represented the moon, completeness, perfection, and permanence. Without it, their most sacred ceremonies felt incomplete, their spiritual practices diminished. According to the oral traditions that have been carefully preserved for generations, the solution came to Anagumang in a divine vision. The deity Lajerum appeared to him in a dream and delivered specific instructions: travel south across the dangerous open ocean to find the sacred stone that his people needed. In ancient Pacific cultures, when the gods gave you a mission, you didn't hesitate or ask for a committee meeting to discuss the logistics. Anagumang gathered 7 of the most skilled navigators and craftsmen he could find. These weren't desperate men with nothing to lose. They were the cream of Yapi society, individuals whose knowledge and abilities were essential to their community's survival. The fact that they were willing to risk their lives on this journey tells us something important about how seriously the Yapis took their spiritual and cultural needs. Setting off in traditional outrigger canoes and rafts, guided only by celestial navigation and ocean patterns that had been passed down through generations, they headed into the unknown. The Pacific Ocean around Micronesia is notorious for sudden storms, unpredictable currents, and stretches of water so vast that even experienced navigators can become disoriented. Many expeditions that ventured too far from home were never seen again. After days of paddling across open ocean, constantly reading wind patterns and star positions to maintain their course, they finally reached their destination, Palau, an archipelago of limestone islands roughly 300 miles south of Yap. What they found there must have seemed like a divine gift. Entire cliffs of sparkling white and gray limestone rose from the ocean, more stone than they could use in 100 lifetimes. The local Palauans were generous hosts, happy to allow the Yapis to quarry stone in exchange for labor, fish, and other goods. After all, limestone was as common as sand to them, hardly worth protecting. But Anagumang and his team weren't just interested in gathering raw materials. They were artists and visionaries, determined to transform this ordinary stone into something extraordinary. At first, they carved the limestone into familiar shapes that held meaning in Yapis culture. Fish representing abundance, sea turtles symbolizing longevity, crescent moons honoring their navigation traditions. But as they worked, these forms began to feel incomplete, somehow inadequate for the grand purpose they had in mind. Then, inspired by the full moon that had guided their journey and appeared in Anagumang's original vision, they began carving perfect circles. But this wasn't just an aesthetic choice. It was a stroke of practical genius. They cut a hole in the center of each disc, not only for spiritual symbolism representing the cycle of life and the eye of the moon, but for purely practical reasons. That central hole allowed them to slip a sturdy wooden pole through the stone, making it possible to carry even the heaviest discs, or roll them like massive wheels. The range of sizes they created was staggering. The smallest stones were about the size of dinner plates, weighing just a few pounds and suitable for relatively minor transactions. The medium-sized ones were comparable to cartwheels, requiring several men to move. But the largest, these were monuments to human ambition and skill. Some stretched 12 feet across and weighed up to 8,000 pounds, carved with such precision that their edges were perfectly smooth and their surfaces gleamed like polished marble. Creating these massive discs required not just artistic vision but sophisticated engineering. The carvers had to understand the structure of limestone, how to work with its grain, and how to achieve perfect roundness using only hand tools made from harder stones and shells. The largest ras stones represent hundreds of hours of skilled labor, executed under the tropical sun of Palau with primitive but effective tools. But creating the stones was only half the challenge. Getting them back to Yap would require solving logistical problems that would challenge modern shipping companies. How do you transport objects weighing several tons across 300 miles of open ocean in wooden canoes and rafts? The answer reveals the first glimpse of the sophisticated thinking that would eventually make this currency system work. They didn't try to bring every stone home immediately, and they certainly didn't assume that physical possession was necessary for ownership. Instead, they began developing a system of distributed ownership and trust that stretched across islands and generations. The smaller stones could be loaded directly onto their canoes, though even these required careful weight distribution and expert seamanship to transport safely. Medium-sized stones were moved on specially constructed rafts, with multiple canoes lashed together to create stable platforms capable of supporting multi-ton loads. The coordination required for these operations was extraordinary. Teams of paddlers had to work in perfect synchronization to keep the heavily loaded vessels stable in ocean swells. But the largest stones presented an almost impossible challenge. Some were simply too massive to risk loading onto any vessel that could reasonably make the journey back to Yap. Others were partially transported but had to be abandoned when weather conditions became too dangerous or when the rafts showed signs of structural failure. Here's where the story takes its most fascinating turn. Rather than considering these immovable or lost stones worthless, the Yepis made a revolutionary decision. If a stone had been properly quarried and carved according to their standards, if the expedition that created it had been legitimate and the craftsmanship met their cultural requirements, then that stone had value regardless of where it physically resided. This wasn't just practical problem-solving born of necessity. It was a profound insight into the nature of value itself. The Yapes had independently discovered what modern economists would later call representative money, currency that derives its worth not from the physical material it's made of, but from the collective agreement that it represents value. When Anaguming and his surviving team members returned to Yap, not all expeditions were successful, and the ocean claimed its share of brave navigators. They brought with them not just limestone discs, but a revolutionary concept that would reshape their entire economy. The ray stones weren't valuable because limestone was rare or precious in any objective sense. Yap was surrounded by coral reefs, which are also primarily calcium carbonate. The stones were valuable because of the stories embedded in each one: the dangerous journey, the skilled craftsmanship, the negotiations with foreign peoples, the courage required to venture into unknown waters, and most importantly, the social agreement that these objects represented wealth and status. Think about this concept for a moment. When you look at $100 bill, you're not seeing $100 worth of paper and ink. You're seeing a promise, backed by the full faith and credit of a government and the collective trust of millions of people who agree that this piece of paper represents value. The Yapes had figured out this same principle centuries before modern economists had words to describe it. But they took the concept even further. Their stone money worked not because of government backing or legal tender laws, but because of something even more powerful: complete community consensus and transparency. Every stone's history was known, every transaction was public, and every individual's wealth was visible to the entire community. Soon you'll discover how this transparent system handled something that would destroy most currencies. What happens when your money literally disappears beneath the waves? The answer reveals why Yape's stone money might have been more philosophically sophisticated than the gold standard. As word of the successful expedition spread throughout Yap, the demand for ray stones grew exponentially. More navigators volunteered for the dangerous journey to Palau, and the frequency of expeditions increased. What had begun as a single visionary quest became a regular trade route, with multiple trips per year, bringing back stones of various sizes and qualities. But this expansion brought new challenges and opportunities. As more stones entered circulation, the Yapes community had to develop increasingly sophisticated methods for determining relative value. Size was obviously one factor. Larger stones required more labor to create and more risk to transport. But it wasn't the only consideration. The quality of carving became crucial. Stones with perfectly smooth surfaces, precisely centered holes, and flawlessly circular shapes commanded premium prices. The skill of the craftsman who created each stone was remembered and factored into its value. Master carvers developed reputations that followed their work for generations, making their stones more valuable than similar-sized pieces created by less skilled artisans. But perhaps most intriguingly, the difficulty and danger of each stone's journey to Yap became part of its permanent value. Stones that had survived multiple storms during transportation, pieces that had been part of particularly hazardous expeditions, or discs that had required exceptional seamanship to bring home, were worth more than stones that had enjoyed relatively smooth journeys. This created a fascinating dynamic where the most valuable stones often had the most dramatic stories attached to them. A medium-sized ray that had been rescued from a sinking raft during a typhoon might be worth more than a larger stone that had been transported without incident. The community wasn't just trading objects. They were trading narratives, adventures, and proof of human courage and skill. The growing complexity of the stone money system required equally sophisticated methods for tracking ownership and managing transactions. This is where our mysterious banker enters the story, though as you'll soon discover, this crucial role wasn't filled by a single individual in the way we might imagine. Instead, the responsibility was distributed among a network of village chiefs, respected elders, master navigators, and other community leaders who collectively maintained the oral records of stone ownership and value. These individuals, working together, formed what was essentially a human database system that tracked thousands of individual accounts across multiple islands. Imagine the mental capacity required for this task. Each keeper of stone records had to memorize not just current ownership information, but the complete transaction history of hundreds of individual stones. They had to remember which stones belonged to which families, track the inheritance of stone wealth through multiple generations, and maintain accurate records of every sale, trade, or gift involving Ray currency. But their responsibilities went even deeper. They had to remember the provenance of each stone, which expedition had brought it back, who had carved it, what challenges had been overcome during its creation and transportation, and how these factors affected its relative value. They were living libraries of financial and cultural history, repositories of information that in modern terms would fill massive databases. The accuracy of their record-keeping was maintained through a system of cross-verification and community oversight. Multiple elders would be consulted for important transactions, and any discrepancies in their recollections would be carefully investigated and resolved through discussion and consultation with other knowledgeable community members. This system of distributed record-keeping had several advantages over more centralized approaches. It was resistant to corruption because no single individual had complete control over the records. It was resilient because the loss of any one keeper didn't destroy the entire system. And it was transparent because the information was shared among multiple trusted community members rather than hidden in secret files. But most importantly, it required and reinforced the social bonds that held Yapi's society together. The stone money system couldn't function without high levels of trust, cooperation, and mutual respect among community members. The very act of maintaining the currency created and strengthened the social relationships that made their entire civilization possible. What twist surprised you most so far? The fact that the most valuable money never moved, or that an entire banking system existed purely in human memory? Let me know in the comments. I might explore your favorite aspect in more detail next time. The true test of any monetary system comes when it faces unexpected challenges, and the Rye stone currency would soon encounter a trial that would have destroyed most other forms of money: the complete physical loss of valuable assets. As more expeditions traveled between Yap and Palau, some carrying increasingly large and valuable stones, the inevitable happened with tragic regularity. Storms struck without warning, turning calm seas into mountainous waves that could swamp even the most expertly constructed rafts. Ropes snapped under the strain of heavy loads, sending carefully carved stones tumbling into the depths. Structural failures occurred when rafts encountered rough weather, and sometimes entire expeditions were lost along with their precious cargo. In any conventional monetary system, this would represent a catastrophic loss. Your coins sink to the bottom of the ocean. Your money is gone. End of story. But the Yapis' response to these losses reveals the true genius of their economic thinking. If everyone agreed that a stone had value because of the skill required to create it, the danger involved in transporting it, and the cultural significance embedded in its creation, then that value didn't simply evaporate just because the physical stone was no longer visible. The labor had still been invested, the risks had still been taken, the craftsmanship had still been demonstrated, and the community agreement about the stone's worth remained intact. So the Yapis made a decision that seems almost mystical but was actually perfectly logical. Stones that had been lost at sea would continue to function as currency as long as the community could agree on their ownership and maintain accurate records of their history. This wasn't just wishful thinking or primitive magical beliefs. It was a sophisticated understanding of what economists now call the store of value function of money. The Yapis recognized that the true value of their currency lay not in physical possession but in social recognition and collective memory. There are documented cases of ray stones that have been resting on the ocean floor for generations but continue to be traded, inherited, and considered valuable assets by their owners. Families pass down ownership of underwater stones through their wills, Young people inherit submarine fortunes they'll never see, and marriage negotiations sometimes involve the transfer of stones that exist only in community memory and oral records. The community keepers of stone records maintain detailed information about these underwater assets, their approximate size and quality based on the recollections of those who saw them before they were lost, their ownership history, their current theoretical location on the sea floor, and their estimated value relative to other stones in circulation. This system of virtual stone money was remarkably similar to modern concepts that wouldn't be formally recognized by Western economics for centuries. The Yapes were essentially operating a system of representative currency backed not by gold or government promises, but by collective memory and social trust. But the sophistication of their monetary system extended even further into concepts that parallel modern financial instruments. Large ray stones were often owned jointly by multiple families or could be divided conceptually into shares or portions. A single massive stone might simultaneously serve as currency for several different transactions, with different families owning fractional interests in the same physical disk. The community record keepers had to track not just whole stone ownership, but incredibly complex fractional ownership arrangements that could span multiple generations and involve dozens of family members. They maintained oral genealogies that connected specific individuals to their portions of particular stones, some of which hadn't been physically seen for decades. This system of fractional ownership was remarkably similar to modern concepts like stocks, bonds, or mutual funds, where the value exists in the agreed-upon share rather than in physical possession of an entire asset. A young man might inherit 1/4 ownership of a large ray stone located on a distant beach, 1/8 interest in another stone sitting in the village center, and full ownership of a smaller stone that happened to be resting on the ocean floor near Palau. Managing these complex ownership structures required mathematical thinking and organizational skills that rival those used in modern financial institutions. The oral record keepers had to perform calculations involving fractions, percentages, and proportional values, all without written numbers or accounting systems. When marriages were arranged, the negotiations might involve combining fractional ownership of multiple stones to create dowry payments of appropriate value. When disputes arose, the resolution might require redistributing ownership shares among multiple parties. When inheritance decisions were made, complex family trees had to be consulted to determine the proper division of stone wealth among multiple heirs. European contact in the late 19th and early 20th centuries brought both fascination and disruption to this remarkable monetary system. Colonial administrators, visiting anthropologists, and curious economists were completely baffled by currency that didn't need to move and banks that existed entirely in people's memories. Some European observers dismissed the system as primitive or backwards, unable to understand how a society could maintain complex financial records without writing or conduct major transactions with objects that might be located hundreds of miles away. They saw the physical stones and assumed the Yapes were simply using heavy, impractical coins rather than recognizing the sophisticated theoretical framework that actually governed the system. But other visitors, particularly those with backgrounds in economics or anthropology, recognized that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Here was a monetary system that had independently developed many of the most advanced concepts in financial theory: representative currency, fractional ownership, distributed record keeping, trust-based transactions, and virtual assets. The introduction of Western currency and banking systems gradually reduced reliance on ray stones for everyday transactions, but it didn't eliminate their cultural and economic significance. Even today, stone money continues to play a crucial role in traditional ceremonies, major land deals, and important social transactions on Yap. Modern Yapese people live in a dual economy, using dollars and cents for daily purchases while still relying on stone money for the transactions that matter most to their cultural identity. A wedding might be paid for with ray stones, even if the reception is catered by a business that accepts credit cards. Land sales often involve stone money payments alongside modern legal documentation. This persistence of the traditional system alongside modern alternatives demonstrates something important about the nature of the rye stone currency. It wasn't just a primitive precursor to real money, but a sophisticated financial system that served social and cultural functions that modern currency can't replicate. The transparency and community involvement required by the stone money system helped maintain social bonds and collective identity in ways that private banking transactions never could. When a major stone money transaction took place, it wasn't just an economic event, it was a community celebration, a reinforcement of social relationships, and a connection to cultural traditions stretching back centuries. The stones themselves serve as physical monuments to this shared history. Unlike paper money or digital transactions that exist only as abstract records, the rye stones are tangible connections to the courage of ancient navigators, the skill of master craftsmen, and the wisdom of community leaders who created and maintained this remarkable system. Walking through modern Yap, visitors can still see hundreds of rye stones scattered throughout the islands. Some stand proudly in village centers, serving as focal points for community gatherings and traditional ceremonies. Others rest quietly in family compounds, watched over by descendants of the people who originally commissioned their creation. Many more are half hidden in jungle vegetation, slowly being reclaimed by the tropical environment, but still remembered and valued by the families who own them. Each stone carries with it layers of history that go far beyond simple monetary value. The largest stones represent collaborative efforts involving dozens of people and months of coordinated work. The most beautiful examples showcase artistic traditions that have been refined over centuries. The stones with the most dramatic stories embody the adventurous spirit and navigational genius of the Yapese people. But perhaps most importantly, every ray stone represents the power of community agreement and social trust to create value from nothing more than shared belief and collective memory. In an age when financial systems are increasingly abstract and disconnected from the people they serve, the stone money of Yap offers a powerful reminder that all currency ultimately depends on social relationships and mutual trust. The lessons embedded in this remarkable system extend far beyond economics into fundamental questions about human cooperation, cultural identity, and the nature of value itself. The Yapese showed that sophisticated financial thinking doesn't require formal institutions, that transparency and community involvement can create more stable monetary systems than secrecy and centralized control, and that the most important aspects of any economy are the human relationships that support it. As we face modern challenges involving digital currencies, virtual assets, and increasingly complex financial instruments, the wisdom of Anagumang and his successors remains surprisingly relevant. They understood that money is ultimately a social technology, a tool for facilitating cooperation and maintaining community bonds, rather than simply a medium of exchange. The oral traditions surrounding each stone continue to be passed down through generations of Yap's families, ensuring that the cultural and economic legacy of the stone money system remains alive and meaningful. Young people learn not just the locations and ownership of family stones, but the stories that give them significance, which ancestors participated in their creation, what marriages or alliances they've facilitated, how they've moved through the community over the centuries, and what lessons they embody about courage, cooperation, and cultural continuity. This continuity represents something that many modern financial systems lack: a deep connection between economic activity and cultural identity. The rye stones aren't just ancient currency. They're physical manifestations of community history, family heritage, and social bonds that continue to shape island life today. The archaeological evidence reveals that the quarrying and transportation of ray stones was far more extensive and sophisticated than early European observers realized. The scale of this ancient mining operation required complex organization, with multiple expeditions per year traveling between Yap and Palau, each carefully planned to maximize efficiency and minimize risk. Recent underwater surveys have located dozens of ray stones on the sea floor along the traditional route between the islands, testament to both the volume of traffic and the dangers involved in these expeditions. Each lost stone represents not just economic loss but human tragedy, the death of skilled navigators and craftsmen whose knowledge and experience were irreplaceable. But the Yapese approach to these losses reveals another aspect of their sophisticated thinking about value and memory. Rather than treating shipwrecks as purely tragic events, they incorporated them into the mythology and value structure of their monetary system. Stones that had been lost in particularly dramatic circumstances became more valuable, not less, because they embodied stories of exceptional courage and determination. The technical skills required for these expeditions were staggering. Master navigators had to read ocean currents, wind patterns, and celestial movements with precision that would challenge modern GPS systems. Expert craftsmen developed specialized techniques for working with limestone, creating tools and methods that were passed down through generations of stone carvers. The transportation phase required even more ingenuity. Large stones were loaded onto rafts using sophisticated leverage systems, wooden rollers, and carefully coordinated teamwork. Multiple canoes would be lashed together using traditional rope-making techniques to create stable platforms capable of supporting stones weighing several tons. The knowledge required for these operations encompassed astronomy, meteorology, materials science, engineering, and logistics, all maintained through oral tradition and practical experience rather than written manuals or formal education. The master navigators and stone workers of Yap possessed expertise that rivals that of modern specialists, achieved through years of apprenticeship and direct experience with the ocean environment. Some expeditions took calculated risks, attempting to transport stones that were at the very limit of what their technology could handle. When these ventures succeeded, the resulting ray stones commanded premium value because of their impressive size and the legendary difficulty of their journey. When they failed, the community still honored the effort, treating the lost stones as valuable symbols of human ambition and courage. The most skilled navigators and stone carvers became legendary figures in Yapese culture, their names and achievements preserved in oral histories that continue to be recited at traditional gatherings. These individuals weren't just craftsmen or sailors, they were the architects of an economic system that would endure for centuries and continue to function long after other ancient monetary systems had been forgotten. As we approach the end of our journey through the world of stone money, it's worth reflecting on what this remarkable system tells us about human ingenuity, the power of community cooperation, and the fundamental nature of economic relationships. In an age when financial systems seem increasingly complex, abstract, and disconnected from ordinary human experience, the Yapese approach offers both inspiration and practical wisdom. The Rystone system demonstrates that sophisticated economic thinking isn't limited to modern societies or formal academic institutions. The Yapese independently developed and implemented concepts that parallel some of the most advanced ideas in contemporary economics: representative currency based on social agreement rather than intrinsic value, fractional ownership systems that allow complex sharing of assets, distributed record-keeping that prevents centralized corruption, and virtual assets that exist primarily as community consensus. But perhaps most importantly, their system shows how economic activity can be integrated with cultural values and social relationships rather than existing in isolation from them. The Rystones weren't just tools for facilitating trade, they were vehicles for maintaining community bonds, preserving historical memory, connecting individual families to the broader story of their people, and ensuring that wealth remained visible and accountable to the entire community. The community leaders who managed this system, our collective banker, who somehow kept track of every stone across multiple islands and generations, performed their duties not for personal profit or individual advancement, but as guardians of cultural heritage and social stability. They understood that their role wasn't just about tracking ownership and facilitating transactions, but about preserving the social trust and collective memory that made the entire system possible. This approach to financial management offers a striking contrast to modern banking, where transactions are often private, wealth can be hidden from community view, and the social consequences of economic decisions are frequently ignored. The Yawnipedia system required complete transparency, community involvement, and recognition that individual wealth existed within a framework of social relationships and mutual responsibility. The resilience of this system is particularly noteworthy. Despite centuries of change, foreign influence, and the introduction of modern alternatives, stone money continues to play a meaningful role in Yawnipedia society. This persistence suggests that the system addresses human needs that go beyond simple economic efficiency, needs for cultural continuity, social connection, and meaningful participation in community life. Today, as we grapple with questions about the future of money, the role of trust in financial systems, and the social consequences of increasingly abstract economic relationships, the stone money of Yap offers valuable insights and alternative perspectives. It reminds us that the most successful currencies aren't necessarily the most technologically sophisticated ones, but those that best serve the comprehensive needs and values of the communities that use them. The Rye stones also demonstrate the power of narrative and shared storytelling in creating and maintaining economic value. Each stone carried with it not just monetary worth, but cultural meaning, historical significance, and social connection. In our current era of digital currencies and virtual assets, this integration of story and value offers important lessons about how to create financial systems that enhance rather than diminish human community. The environmental sustainability of the stone money system is another aspect worth considering. Unlike modern currencies that depend on continuous resource extraction, energy consumption, and technological infrastructure, the Rye stones were essentially permanent stores of value that required no ongoing inputs once they were created. A stone carved 5 centuries ago can still function as currency today, representing a level of sustainability that few modern financial instruments can match. The next time you tap your credit card, check your bank balance online, or read about the latest developments in cryptocurrency. Take a moment to remember Anagumang and his 7 companions setting off across the Pacific with nothing but stars to guide them and faith in their vision. Remember the master carvers who spent months creating perfect lunar circles from raw limestone, working in the tropical heat with primitive tools to achieve results that would challenge modern machinery. Remember the community elders who held an entire economy in their memories, maintaining complex records of ownership, value, and transaction history without computers, databases, or written documents. Remember the navigators who risked their lives repeatedly to bring these stone treasures home, and the families who continue to honor their ancestors by maintaining the traditions and values embedded in each massive disc. In a world where money often feels abstract, disconnected from human experience, and divorced from the communities it supposedly serves, the Rye stones stand as monuments to a different possibility. They represent currency that was simultaneously practical and sacred, individual and communal, ancient and surprisingly modern. The giant stones of Yap remind us that the most important elements in any economy aren't the specific mechanisms of exchange, whether coins, bills, or digital transactions, but the human relationships, shared stories, and community trust that give meaning and stability to economic life. They show us that money at its best isn't just a tool for facilitating trade, but a technology for building and maintaining the social bonds that make civilization possible. The legacy of Anagumang's vision continues to influence modern thinking about economics, anthropology, and social organization. Academic researchers study the Raystone system as an example of how complex institutions can emerge and persist through purely social mechanisms. Economic theorists examine it as a case study in alternative approaches to value, currency, and financial management. But perhaps the most important lesson from the stone money of Yap is simpler and more fundamental, that human communities are capable of remarkable creativity and cooperation when they work together toward shared goals. The navigation skills, craftsmanship, organizational ability, and social trust required to create and maintain this system represent achievements that rival any in human history. And that's why a sailor's dream 5 centuries ago continues to teach us today about the true nature of value, trust, and community. The massive stone wheels scattered across the islands of Yap stand as enduring testimony to the power of human imagination, the importance of social cooperation, and the fundamental truth that the most valuable things in any economy aren't material objects, but the relationships and shared understandings that connect us to each other. The giant stones remind us that real wealth lies not in what we can accumulate for ourselves, but in what we can create together, share with our communities, and pass on to future generations. In our increasingly connected yet often fragmented world, the wisdom embedded in these ancient stones offers both inspiration and practical guidance for building economic systems that serve human flourishing rather than simply maximizing individual gain. If you're in the mood for another gentle mystery from the depths of human history, our next deep dive awaits you. Until then, may your own journeys be guided by wisdom as enduring as the stone money of Yap, and may you find in your own community the same spirit of cooperation and trust that made this remarkable system possible.